She was the loyal nurse to the millionaire in a coma, but when he woke up, this is how he repaid her. Millionaire awakens from coma and catches his loyal nurse doing something that broke his heart. The first lights of day filtered through the silk curtains of the mansion in Beverly Hills, the most exclusive neighborhood in Los Angeles. In that luxurious room, where the silence was only broken by the distant hum of the city, Amelia Contreras moved with the precision of someone who has perfected a sacred routine. Her small, tan hands worked delicately as she changed the clothes of Matthew Sterling, the real estate magnate who had been in a coma since that fatal accident on the Pacific Coast Highway. 5 months had passed, 5 months in which Amelia had faithfully come every day, even though no one was paying her anymore. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," she whispered, as she did every morning, expecting no response. The Santa Monica Pier was already getting busy this morning. The food trucks were setting up when I drove by. As she carefully unbuttoned the Egyptian cotton shirt to replace it with a clean one, she noticed something unusual, a movement so subtle that for a moment she thought she had imagined it. But then, the impossible happened. Matthew's eyelids trembled and slowly began to open. Amelia froze, the clean shirt suspended in mid-air. Her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her temples. Those eyes, closed for so long, were now trying to focus on the room, on her, on the reality that had been absent for nearly half a year. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from to receive our love and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. Matthew blinked several times, trying to adjust to the light that felt blinding after so long in darkness. When he finally managed to focus his gaze, he found a stranger holding his clothes while he was partially undressed. Confusion quickly gave way to embarrassment, and then a deep unease. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice raspy and weak, barely audible. "What are you doing?" His words came out haltingly, as if he had forgotten how to speak. The smooth, authoritative tone that had once dominated boardrooms was now just an insecure whisper. Amelia, recovering from the initial shock, quickly finished buttoning his shirt and arranged the sheet over him, trying to restore some of his dignity. "I'm Amelia, your nurse," she replied in a calm, professional voice, hiding the emotion that overwhelmed her. "I'm taking care of you. You were in a car accident and have been in a coma for almost 5 months. Matthew scanned the room with a disoriented gaze. He recognized the high ceilings and ornate moldings of his Beverly Hills mansion, but everything seemed strangely foreign, as if he were seeing his own home through an intruder's eyes. "Where's Valeria? And Ethan? Where's my partner?" he asked, trying unsuccessfully to sit up. His body, once strong and athletic, barely responded to his commands. Amelia momentarily averted her gaze. An almost imperceptible flicker of unease crossed her eyes before she regained her professional expression. "I'm going to call Dr. Evans immediately to inform him that you're awake," she said, skillfully avoiding the question. "Please don't try to get up yet. Your body needs time to readjust." As Amelia hurried out of the room, Matthew managed to get a better look at his own body. The discoloration on his skin and the extreme thinness of his arms told a different story than he expected. It wasn't just the natural deterioration from months in bed. There were clear signs of neglect, of a lack of the basic care someone in his condition required. With painful effort, he managed to lift the sheets enough to see the beginnings of pressure sores on his legs. His heart sank at the evidence. Before the change of clothes, he must have been dirty, neglected for days. A terrible suspicion began to form in his mind. Who was this woman really? If she was his nurse, why did she seem to be the only one here? Why wasn't his fiancée here the moment he woke up? And where was Ethan, who had been like a brother for the past 2 decades? From the hallway, he heard Amelia's muffled voice on the phone. "Doctor, he's awake. Yes, he's conscious and talking. No, he doesn't know anything yet. It's better if you come yourself." Those fragmented words only intensified the unease growing inside him. "He doesn't know anything yet," echoed in his head like an ominous warning. He tried to remember the accident, but his memory was just a hazy void. He remembered leaving an important meeting, driving in the rain on Sunset Boulevard, and then nothing. A blank space where 5 months of his life should be. When Amelia returned to the room, Matthew watched her with new eyes. She wasn't the stranger he had initially thought. There was something in the way she moved around the room, in the familiarity with which she adjusted the curtains so the light wouldn't bother him, that suggested she had been caring for him for a while, perhaps a long while. "The doctor is on his way," she announced, approaching with a glass of water. "Would you like a drink? Your throat must be dry." Matthew nodded, allowing her to help him sit up slightly to drink. The cool water felt like a miracle in his parched throat. "Thank you," he murmured, studying her intently. "How long have you been taking care of me?" The direct question seemed to make her uncomfortable, but Amelia answered honestly, "For about 3 months, more or less." "And my fiancée? Why isn't she here?" Amelia looked out the window where the Los Angeles skyline stretched until it was lost in the morning haze. "The doctor can explain everything better than I can," she finally replied. "I can only tell you that things have changed a lot since your accident." Those words, spoken with a mixture of compassion and caution, confirmed what Matthew was already beginning to suspect. Something was deeply wrong. At that moment, contemplating the genuinely concerned face of this woman, who seemed to be the only person looking out for him, Matthew Sterling was certain that the true impact of the accident went far beyond his physical injuries. As they waited for the doctor, a disturbing thought took hold of him. Who was this woman really, and why was she the only one who seemed to care about his well-being? A week had passed since Matthew's awakening. The February sun poured through the large windows of the Beverly Hills mansion, bathing the marble floor in golden light. In those days, his strength had begun to return gradually, though he still needed help with the most basic tasks. Sitting in an armchair by the window overlooking the garden, Matthew carefully watched Amelia's every move, the methodical way she prepared his medications, the gentleness with which she helped him during physical therapy sessions, and the infinite patience with which she answered his questions. Everything about her reflected a dedication that went beyond professional duty. "Inhale deeply," she would instruct, while helping him with breathing exercises. "That's it. Now exhale slowly." What intrigued Matthew most were the conversations. Amelia told him about life in the city, about changes in local politics, even about the last Lakers game at the Crypto.com arena. She spoke as if they were old friends, with a naturalness that suggested months of prior dialogue. "It's strange," he commented during a pause. "You talk to me like you know me well." Amelia smiled softly as she adjusted a pillow behind his back. "I've spoken to you every day for months, Mr. Sterling. Dr. Evans said it was good to talk to you as if you could hear, and I believed you could." That afternoon, while she was replacing the withered sunflowers with fresh rosebuds on the bedside table, Matthew finally asked the question that had been on his mind for days. "Why are you still here, Amelia?" His voice was firmer now, regaining some of its old business-like tone. "From what I understand, no one else is taking care of me. Valeria, my fiancée, hasn't shown up once since I woke up. And according to the doctor, she wasn't coming before either." Amelia's hands stilled over the rosebuds. A thick silence filled the room as she seemed to debate internally. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to release a heavy burden, she sat in a chair across from him. "I was hired immediately after your accident," she began. "Ms. Valeria hired me personally, but after 3 weeks," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "she fired me. She said they needed to cut expenses." Matthew frowned. Cut expenses? He owned one of the largest real estate groups in the country. The idea was absurd. "When I came back a few days later to pick up some things I'd left behind," Amelia continued, "I found you alone. Completely alone." Her voice broke slightly. "Without proper care, without basic hygiene. The cleaning lady who came occasionally told me no one had been there in days." She brought a hand to her chest, as if the memory still caused her physical pain. "So," she hesitated, almost ashamed, "I decided to come back. At first just for a few hours a day, then full-time when I realized no one else was properly caring for you." Matthew stared at her, processing what he had just heard. "Are you telling me you've been taking care of me without pay? For months?" The disbelief and emotion were evident in his voice. "I couldn't just leave you like that," she replied simply. "It's my duty as a nurse, but also," she faltered, "I couldn't live with myself knowing I abandoned you when you needed me most." Matthew closed his eyes, trying to absorb the revelation. Something didn't add up. Valeria, who had always boasted of her devotion, had abandoned him in his most vulnerable moment. And where was Ethan, his business partner and best friend from college, whom he considered a brother? "There's something else you're not telling me," he stated, not as a question, but as a certainty. Amelia's face showed a brief internal conflict. Finally, she stood up and walked to her hand-stitched tote bag. From it, she pulled out a small black device. "It wasn't my intention to invade your privacy," she explained, holding out a voice recorder. "But certain conversations I overheard alarmed me, and I started recording what was happening in the mansion when I had access. I think you need to hear this, however painful it may be. With trembling hands, Matthew took the device. When he pressed the play button, the room filled with voices he recognized immediately. The first recording was a conversation between Valeria and Ethan in the mansion's library, 3 weeks after the accident. "How much longer do we have to wait?" Valeria's irritated voice echoed clearly. "The doctor said he could wake up at any time." "Be patient, my love," replied Ethan's unmistakable voice. "The accident wasn't fatal like we planned, but he's out of the way. I already have control of the company's operations. As soon as we're married, you'll have legal access to his personal accounts. And if he wakes up before then we'll resort to Plan B, a little medication in the wrong dose, and it will look like a sad medical complication. No one will question it." A deathly silence fell over the room when the recording ended. Matthew's face had hardened, his eyes fixed on a distant point as he tried to absorb the magnitude of the betrayal. "There's more," Amelia said softly, showing him more files on the recorder. "Conversations about altering company documents, about how they tampered with your car's brakes before the accident, about plans to transfer assets after your inevitable passing." "Why did you risk so much to get these recordings?" Matthew asked, his voice barely a whisper. "At first it was instinct," she confessed. "Something about their behavior didn't seem right. Later, when I started overhearing snippets of conversation, I couldn't do nothing knowing what they were planning." Matthew extended his trembling hand and took Amelia's in his. His fingers, still weak, clung to hers like a lifeline in a storm. "You saved my life," he said simply. "Not just by caring for me when everyone else abandoned me, but by risking yourself to uncover the truth." In that moment, the look they shared carried more meaning than any words. A trust was beginning to form between them, a connection forged in adversity that neither of them could have foreseen. As the sun set over Sunset Boulevard, painting the sky orange and purple, Matthew understood that he had awakened to a world very different from the one he remembered, a world where those he trusted most had plotted his death, and a stranger had risked everything to save him. Night had fallen over Los Angeles when Matthew listened to the last of the recordings. The lights of the distant skyscrapers glittered, a stark contrast to the darkness he now felt inside. Every word played by that small device was like a dagger tearing apart the foundations of the life he thought he had. "Play that part again," Matthew requested, his voice a low murmur in the dim room. Amelia, her expression compassionate, pressed the button again. The voice of Valeria, the woman with whom he had shared the last 5 years of his life, filled the room. "How much longer do we have to wait? The doctor said he could wake up at any time." Her tone was impatient, irritated, so different from the sweetness she always showed him. "Be patient, my love," replied Ethan, the man he had called his brother for 20 years. "The accident wasn't fatal like we planned, but he's out of the way. I already have control of the company's operations. As soon as we're married, you'll have legal access to his personal accounts. And if he wakes up before then we'll resort to Plan B, a little medication in the wrong dose, and it will look like a sad medical complication. No one will question it." Matthew clenched his jaw so tightly he felt pain. The betrayal was absolute, immeasurable. Each word echoed in his head like an endless refrain. His fiancée and his best friend had not only abandoned him during his convalescence, they had orchestrated the accident, and when that failed, they planned to finish the job. "When was this recorded?" he asked, his voice strangely controlled, despite the storm raging within him. 3 weeks after your accident," Amelia answered softly. "It was the first recording I made, the one that alerted me to what was really happening." With trembling fingers, Matthew picked up the glass of water resting on the nightstand. The glass shook in his hand, spilling drops onto the blanket covering his legs. "There's more," Amelia continued, showing him the recorder. "I have at least 7 different conversations. They talk about altering company documents, about how they tampered with your car's brakes before the accident on the Pacific Coast Highway, about plans to transfer assets after your," she hesitated, "your inevitable passing." Matthew closed his eyes, trying to process all this information. He vaguely remembered the day of the accident, an important meeting with foreign investors, the torrential rain so common that season, the rush to get to a dinner with Valeria, and then nothing. An absolute void until he woke up a week ago with Amelia by his side. "The brakes," he muttered. "I felt something was wrong with them right before I lost control on that curve." Amelia nodded slowly. "In one of the recordings, Ethan mentions a mechanic in Van Nuys, someone who did the job with no questions asked. A heavy silence fell over the room as the full weight of the betrayal settled in Matthew's mind. Everything he had believed to be solid in his life had crumbled like a house of cards. The woman he loved, the friend he considered a brother, both had plotted his death for money and power. "Why did you risk so much to get these recordings?" he finally asked, his voice nearly a whisper. "They could have found you out, they could have hurt you." Amelia looked down at her small, worn hands, hands that had cared for him with such dedication. At first it was instinct, she confessed. Something about their behavior didn't feel right. "Ms. Valeria came to see you less and less, and when she did, she never asked about your health, only talked to the estate manager about financial matters." She paused, brushing back a strand of dark hair that had fallen across her face. "Later, when I started overhearing snippets of conversation between them in the hallway, I couldn't stand by and do nothing knowing what they were planning. It wouldn't be human." Her eyes met Matthew's. "I couldn't look myself in the mirror each morning knowing I let them hurt you when I could have stopped it." The simplicity of her answer, the genuine humanity it reflected, moved Matthew beyond words. In a world where those he loved most had proven to be monsters in disguise, this woman, a complete stranger, had risked everything for him, expecting nothing in return. With effort, he reached out his trembling hand and took hers. His fingers, still weak from months of inactivity, clung to hers like a castaway to a piece of driftwood in the middle of the ocean. "You saved my life," he said simply, the words insufficient to express the depth of his gratitude. "Not just by caring for me when everyone abandoned me, but by risking yourself to uncover the truth." Amelia's eyes, dark and as expressive as a rich, dark roast coffee, grew slightly misty. "Anyone with a conscience would have done the same," she replied, though they both knew it wasn't true. In a world where betrayal seemed to be the norm, her loyalty was exceptional. For a long moment, they looked at each other without speaking. Something indescribable passed between them, a connection that transcended words, forged in the fire of adversity. Neither of them could have predicted it. The powerful tycoon and the humble nurse, brought together by circumstances that defied all probability. "What do we do now?" Amelia finally asked, breaking the silence. "They think you're still in a coma. If they find out you've woken up..." She left the sentence unfinished, but they both understood the implication. The plan B Ethan mentioned in the recording could be set in motion at any moment. Matthew straightened his shoulders, and for the first time since waking up, Amelia caught a glimpse of the man he had been before the accident. Decisive, strategic, ruthless when necessary. "Now," he said with a firm voice, "we keep my recovery a secret. I need to get my strength back, and in the meantime we'll gather more evidence. Valeria and Ethan think they have all the time in the world to execute their plan. That will be their downfall." A faint smile touched Amelia's lips. "Doctor, Heavens is on our side," she said. "He also suspected something wasn't right." Matthew nodded slowly. A plan was beginning to form in his mind, a strategy to unmask those who had tried to destroy him. The anger and pain were still there, pulsing beneath the surface, but now they had a purpose, a channel. "They don't know who they're dealing with," he muttered, more to himself than to Amelia. "I'll teach them that betraying Matthew Sterling was the biggest mistake of their lives." Outside, Los Angeles continued its relentless rhythm, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the Beverly Hills mansion. The city lights drew artificial constellations on the horizon, while inside, two people whom fate had united in the most unlikely way began to weave the threads of a long-awaited justice. The morning sun's rays cut through the half-closed blinds, casting golden stripes across the marble floor of the master bedroom. 3 days had passed since Matthew discovered Valeria and Ethan's betrayal, and each passing hour only fueled his determination. Dr. Evans had just left after his daily visit. As Amelia had suspected, the doctor didn't hesitate to take their side after hearing the recordings. His professional indignation was palpable upon learning of the plans to manipulate medication. "It's a violation of everything our profession stands for," he had said, adjusting his glasses with hands trembling from suppressed rage. "You can count on my absolute discretion and help." Now, sitting in an armchair by the window overlooking the bougainvillea-filled garden, Matthew watched the traffic on Rodeo Drive. His body, though still weak, was regaining vitality with each passing day. The intense physical therapy was paying off, and he could stand for increasingly longer periods. "The element of surprise is our greatest advantage," he explained to Amelia, who was meticulously organizing medications on a nearby cabinet. They think I'm still unconscious, unable to defend my interests. As long as they don't know I'm awake, we have time to prepare. Amelia nodded, precisely labeling each bottle with times and dosages. But we need more concrete evidence, she pointed out, turning to him. The recordings are important, but they can be challenged in court. They could claim they're edited or taken out of context. We need documents, records of the transfers they tried to make, proof of the car's tampering. Her practical, direct words reflected a side of her that Matthew found increasingly fascinating. The woman who had cared for him with such gentleness also possessed a sharp, strategic mind. Ethan was always meticulous, he commented, a flash of pain crossing his face as he mentioned the name of the friend who had betrayed him. In college, he kept copies of absolutely everything. I'm sure he maintains detailed records of every move. The problem is accessing them without alerting them. As he spoke, Matthew remembered the years shared with Ethan, from the lecture halls at the University of Southern California to the founding of Sterling Development Group. 20 years of friendship, business, confidences, all reduced to ashes by greed. It was then that Amelia broke into a smile that transformed her face. For the first time since he'd known her, Matthew saw a glint of cunning in her eyes that completely surprised him. They still see me as just a caregiver, she said, moving closer. Someone invisible, who comes and goes to tend to the coma patient. That could be our biggest advantage. Matthew watched her with growing admiration. Behind that dedication and gentleness was a keen intelligence and an unbreakable courage that he was beginning to value more and more. What do you have in mind? He asked, leaning forward with interest, ignoring the slight pain the movement caused his still stiff muscles. Ethan comes to the mansion every Friday for meetings with Valeria, Amelia explained, lowering her voice slightly as if the walls could hear. They always use the downstairs office. If I can install a camera there and also look for documents when they're not around. It's too risky, Matthew interrupted, genuinely concerned. The thought of Amelia putting herself in danger for him was unbearable. If they catch you, it's riskier to let them continue with their plan, she replied firmly. Her eyes, usually soft, now showed a steely determination. Every day that passes, they consolidate more control over your assets. We need to act before it's too late. Matthew recognized in her gaze the same resolve that had driven him to build his empire from scratch. It was the look of someone who doesn't stop at obstacles. Joaquin, the gardener, has taken a liking to me, Amelia continued. He could help us access certain areas without raising suspicion, and Lupe, the cook, has suspected for a while that something isn't right with Miss Valeria. She's overheard conversations. The household staff, Matthew murmured, nodding slowly. The invisible ones, as you say, the ones who see and hear everything because no one notices their presence. Exactly, Amelia confirmed. And there's more. I handled a similar case at General Hospital a few years ago. An elderly patient whose nephew was trying to take her inheritance. I learned a lot about legal procedures and admissible evidence. Matthew looked at her with renewed respect. This woman continued to surprise him. I think we need to contact my lawyer, Samuel Montgomery, he said after a moment's reflection. He's been with me from the beginning, before Sterling was what it is today. If there's anyone I can trust, it's him. Amelia jotted the name down in her small notebook. I'll ask Dr. Evans to contact him. It will be less suspicious than if I call. Over the next few hours, they outlined a meticulous plan. They would contact a small circle of trust, the doctor, the lawyer, and a few key members of the household staff. They would establish a secure communication system and begin gathering hard evidence, all while Matthew continued his physical recovery, preparing for the moment of confrontation. That night, as Amelia helped Matthew with his evening physical therapy exercises, their hands touched for a moment longer than necessary. A subtle contact, barely perceptible, but it sent an electric current through both of them. Their gazes met briefly, and something indefinable passed between them, a connection that transcended the patient-caregiver relationship. Neither of them mentioned the moment, but when Amelia finally wished him good night and turned off the main light, leaving only the soft glow of the bedside lamp, they both knew that something in their dynamic had subtly shifted. In the darkness of his room, Matthew reflected on the turns his life had taken. Betrayal had stripped him of everything he thought was secure, but it had also revealed an invaluable truth. Sometimes, we find loyalty and strength in the most unexpected places. Outside, the full moon bathed the gardens of the Beverly Hills mansion. Somewhere in the city, Valeria and Ethan continued with their plans, ignorant that their victim had awakened and was preparing to confront them. The game was just beginning, and this time Matthew Sterling would not be alone. The Mexican march brought afternoons of dry heat and clear skies. For the 3 weeks that followed the creation of their plan, Amelia transformed into an impromptu investigator. With the subtlety of one who has learned to move without being noticed, she took advantage of her apparent invisibility to the conspirators. One afternoon, while Valeria and Ethan were having lunch in the garden, she managed to discreetly install a small camera in the office, hidden among the books on the shelf. On another occasion, when the mansion was momentarily empty during a charity gala they both attended, she photographed compromising documents from Ethan's desk and the safe, the combination for which she had obtained thanks to Joaquin, the gardener who had worked for the Sterling family for 30 years. The lawyer, Samuel Montgomery, had joined the small circle of trust. His indignation upon discovering the betrayal was matched only by his determination to help the man he considered not just a client, but a friend. "You're building a solid case," he periodically assured Matthew during his clandestine visits. "Every new piece of evidence brings us closer to putting them behind bars." Meanwhile, Matthew's physical recovery was progressing remarkably. Daily physical therapy sessions, combined with his iron will, had yielded impressive results. He could now walk around the room with minimal support and perform increasingly demanding exercises. One particularly cool night, as the full moon illuminated the mansion's gardens, Amelia rushed into the room. Her eyes shone with a mixture of triumph and concern. "They altered your will," she reported, spreading several photographs of documents on the bed. "I found drafts with your forged signature. According to the new document, in the event of your death, Valeria would inherit everything, and there's a special clause guaranteeing that Ethan would maintain operational control of the companies." Matthew examined the evidence with a grim expression. In the lamplight, the forged signatures were noticeably different from his own, but convincing enough to fool someone who didn't know it well. "I also discovered scheduled transfers," Amelia continued, showing more photographs. "They've been moving small amounts to accounts in the Cayman Islands, amounts that wouldn't raise suspicion individually, but they add up to millions." Matthew flipped through the pages with slightly trembling hands. His jaw tightened more and more as he absorbed the magnitude of the deceit. He had trusted them both blindly, had given them not only his heart, but the keys to his empire. "How could I have been so blind?" he murmured more to himself than to her, letting the documents fall onto his lap. "Ethan was like a brother to me. We were roommates in college. He was my best man when I won the Entrepreneur of the Year award. And Valeria," his voice broke slightly, "I was going to make her my wife." Amelia sat gently beside him on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped slightly under her weight, creating a shared space between them. "The people closest to us have the greatest power to hurt us," she said in a soft voice, almost a verbal caress, "precisely because we trust them without reservation." Matthew raised his eyes to meet hers. In that dark, deep gaze, he found a comfort he hadn't thought possible. "Like you?" he asked with sudden intensity. "I trusted my life to a complete stranger who decided to care for me without getting anything in return, and you haven't disappointed me for a single moment." Amelia blushed slightly, looking down at her hands in her lap. Small but strong hands with short, practical nails, so different from Valeria's perfect manicures. "It's different," she replied humbly. "I had nothing to gain by betraying your trust. They saw an opportunity for wealth and power, and ambition overshadowed any loyalty." "It's not different," Matthew insisted, taking her hands in his. The contact, warm and firm, sent a jolt of electricity between them. "Many would have just moved on, looked for another job. You chose to stay, to take a risk. Why?" The question hung between them, laden with unspoken meanings. Amelia felt her heart race, unsure how to answer. Words seemed inadequate to explain something she didn't fully understand herself. At first it was out of duty, professional ethics, she began hesitantly, searching for the right words. "Later," she paused, gathering courage, "I think it was because during the months I cared for you in your coma, talking to you even though there was no reply, telling you about my day, reading you passages from your favorite books, somehow I started to get to know you." Her eyes met Matthew's with renewed determination. "And the man I got to know through the stories of those who truly admired you, through the books in your library, through the causes you quietly supported." Her voice softened. "That man deserved a chance to survive." Matthew felt something warm expand in his chest, gratitude, admiration, and a new feeling he didn't yet dare to name. It was as if a ray of sunshine had broken through the clouds after a devastating storm. "You've read my annotations," he said, surprised. "The margins of my books." Amelia nodded, a small smile on her face. "Your comments on Robert Frost told me more about you than any article in a business magazine." Before Matthew could respond, Amelia's phone vibrated with a message. The nurse checked it quickly and her expression shifted to one of alert. "It's my contact in security," she said, standing up. "Ethan and Valeria just arrived for their weekly meeting. This is our chance to get more evidence." Matthew watched her transform instantly, from the vulnerable woman who had just shared her feelings to the determined strategist who had been gathering evidence for weeks. "Be careful," he warned, unable to hide his concern. "Don't take any unnecessary risks." Amelia paused at the door and looked at him for a moment. "The biggest risk would be letting them get away with it," she replied firmly. "I won't let you down, Mr. Sterling." As he watched her leave, Matthew understood that in the midst of the most painful betrayal, he had found an unexpected loyalty. The void left by those who had betrayed him was beginning to be filled with something new and even more valuable. Outside, Los Angeles continued its tireless rhythm. The lights of downtown LA shone like a beacon, a symbol of a freedom that Matthew would soon reclaim. But for now, everything depended on a woman whose courage and determination had touched not only his gratitude, but also, though he wouldn't yet fully admit it, his heart. For the next 2 weeks, the investigation continued meticulously. The case file against Valeria and Ethan grew with each new piece of evidence collected. Audio recordings, photographs of documents, testimonies from the mansion staff, and expert opinions on the signature forgeries. The small group of allies worked in silence, building a case that would not only expose the conspiracy, but also ensure legal consequences for the traitors. April arrived in Los Angeles with jacaranda trees in full bloom, painting the avenues purple. In the Beverly Hills mansion, Matthew had made remarkable progress in his recovery. He could now walk unassisted for short periods, his voice had regained its natural authority, and his mind, always sharp, was working at full capacity, planning every detail of the confrontation. One evening, as they had dinner together in the room, a routine that had become special for both of them, Matthew set his cutlery down next to the plate of short rib risotto that Lupe had specially prepared to celebrate his improvement. "Tomorrow is the day," he announced in a firm voice. His eyes, once dulled by betrayal, now shone with renewed determination. "We're ready to face them." Amelia nodded, though a slight tremor in her hands as she poured more water revealed her nervousness. For weeks she had been his strength, but now that the decisive moment was approaching, the weight of what they were about to do rested on her shoulders. "I've already contacted Samuel and the private investigator," Matthew continued. "They'll come with 2 agents from the anti-corruption task force. Everything is arranged." The candlelight they had lit for dinner cast dancing shadows on Amelia's face. Matthew noticed her worried expression. "And are you ready for this?" she asked, the concern clear in her voice. "Confronting 2 people who meant so much to you won't be easy." Matthew looked toward the window. Outside, the city lights glittered like fallen stars over the LA basin. He remained silent for a long moment, contemplating. "I don't know if anyone can ever be truly ready for something like this," he finally admitted, "but every day I'm awake, regaining my strength, I also regain my resolve. They didn't just plan to kill me, they planned to usurp everything I built with years of honest work. I can't let that happen." He paused, turning his gaze back to her. In her dark eyes, Amelia saw something that went beyond the desire for justice. "Besides," he added softly, "I have something more to fight for now besides justice." The look they shared held a promise, not spoken in words, a future still uncertain, but full of possibilities. Neither of them needed to say more. What had grown between them during those weeks was as unexpected as it was undeniable. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the weather itself favored their plans. Everything was meticulously prepared. Samuel Montgomery, the lawyer, and Felipe Guzman, the private investigator, arrived discreetly through the service entrance, accompanied by 2 officers. Dr. Evans was present for any emergency. The confrontation would take place in the library, where Valeria and Ethan had been summoned, believing it was a meeting with the estate manager to discuss new financial moves. Matthew, dressed formally for the first time since the accident, waited in a leather armchair facing the door. The dark grey suit, though now loose on him, restored some of his former imposing presence. Amelia stood by his side, not in her usual nurse's uniform, but in a simple blue dress that highlighted the dignity with which she had handled the entire situation. At 11 a.m. sharp, the library door opened. Valeria entered first, stunning in a designer outfit, followed by Ethan in his trademark tailored suit. They both stopped dead in their tracks, frozen by the sight that greeted them. "Welcome," Matthew said, his voice calm but as sharp as obsidian. "I believe we have a lot to talk about regarding car accidents, forged wills, and plans for my inevitable passing." Valeria's face turned dramatically pale, her perfect makeup a stark contrast to the sudden whiteness of her skin. Ethan, ever the strategist, tried to maintain his composure. "What is this nonsense?" he attempted, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to his own ears. "We're so happy you've woken up. We were devastated waiting for this miracle." He took a step forward, arms outstretched as if to embrace his old friend, but stopped at Matthew's glacial stare. "Spare us the performance," Amelia intervened, stepping forward. "We have everything on tape. Your conversations, your plans, the orders to tamper with the car's brakes." Valeria shot a look of pure hatred at Amelia. "You," she hissed, her voice laced with venom. "I fired you. How dare you come back and invent these lies?" "She didn't invent anything," Matthew replied coldly, "and thanks to her sense of duty and compassion, I'm alive to face you myself." The investigator stepped forward, placing a folder of evidence on the table. "We have recordings of you planning the accident," he explained in a professional tone. "Photographs of forged documents, testimony from the mechanic who tampered with the brakes, records of suspicious transfers to offshore accounts, and much more." What followed was a storm of denials, accusations, and finally desperate attempts at negotiation when they understood the extent of the evidence against them. "Matthew, please," Valeria pleaded, tears ruining her perfect makeup. "You don't understand. It was Ethan's idea. I was just scared. He manipulated me." "Liar!" Ethan roared, abandoning all pretense of innocence. "It was you who suggested tampering with the brakes. You who insisted on upping his medication when he didn't die in the crash." Watching them crumble, turning on each other, was the final confirmation of their guilt. Matthew watched the scene with a mixture of revulsion and sadness for what they had once meant to him. The officers moved forward, reading them their rights as they snapped on the handcuffs. Valeria was sobbing uncontrollably while Ethan demanded to call his lawyer. But it was too late. The evidence file was damning, and their mutual confessions during the argument were the icing on the cake. As the police escorted them out, Matthew felt a mix of relief and profound sorrow watching the people he once considered family being led away. 20 years of friendship with Ethan, 5 years of love for Valeria, all reduced to ashes by unchecked ambition. When the library was finally empty, with only him and Amelia remaining after everyone else had left to give them privacy, Matthew let out a long sigh, as if releasing a weight he had carried for too long. "It's over," he murmured. "It's really over." Amelia came closer and, without a word, wrapped him in a gentle but firm hug. For the first time since waking from the coma, Matthew allowed himself to cry, not just for the betrayal but for the gratitude of having found someone truly loyal when he needed it most. In that moment of shared vulnerability, as the midday sun bathed the library in golden light, they both understood that what ended that day was not just a story of betrayal, but also the beginning of something new and authentic between them. The months following the arrests of Valeria and Ethan brought profound changes for Matthew and Amelia. The case became a media scandal that shook the Los Angeles business world. The tycoon, the fiancé, and the traitorous partner ran the headlines as preliminary hearings revealed increasingly sordid details of the conspiracy. While the accused faced criminal and civil proceedings, Matthew gradually retook control of TER's Sterling Development Group. The task proved more challenging than he had anticipated. The company was in a delicate situation. Ethan had signed questionable contracts, diverted resources to phantom projects, and made decisions that only benefited his personal interests. "The damage is extensive but not irreparable," Samuel Montgomery assured him during one of their weekly meetings. "We have to review every contract, every investment, but the fundamental structure of the company is still solid." Amelia remained by his side, no longer as a nurse but as an advisor and friend. Her insight and intelligence, qualities Matthew admired more each day, proved invaluable in the corporate environment as well. She had a natural ability to assess people and situations, a gift for uncovering hidden intentions, that Matthew now recognized he had lacked in his previous judgment. "I don't trust this supplier," Amelia commented one afternoon, while they reviewed proposals for a new development in Scottsdale. "There's something in the way they're presenting the numbers that doesn't add up." A subsequent investigation confirmed her suspicions. The company was a front created by a former associate of Ethan's. Episodes like this repeated themselves, solidifying Matthew's trust in Amelia's instincts and strengthening the bond between them. One July afternoon, as they reviewed documents in the mansion's office with the rumble of an approaching storm outside, Matthew noticed Amelia seemed distant, worried. Her gaze kept drifting to the gardens, where the first drops of rain were beginning to fall. "What's bothering you?" he asked, setting the papers aside. She hesitated before answering, meticulously arranging the documents in front of her, as if buying time. "I've been thinking that maybe it's time for me to move on," she said finally, her voice barely audible over the initial patter of rain on the windows. "You're recovered. Your business is stabilizing. My presence here isn't necessary in the same way anymore." Matthew felt a wave of panic he didn't expect, a sudden emptiness that reminded him of the free fall sensation during the accident. "You want to leave?" he asked, unable to hide the dismay in his voice. Amelia looked up, her eyes revealing an internal conflict. "I don't want to," she admitted, "but I'm afraid I'm holding on to something, a situation that was born from extraordinary circumstances. Normal life will inevitably return. You're a successful businessman, used to a world very different from mine." Outside, the storm intensified, raindrops lashing against the windows, as if the weather itself mirrored the emotional turbulence in the room. Matthew stood up, walking to the window as he gathered his thoughts. He watched the rain-swept garden, the jacaranda trees swaying violently. When he turned to face her, there was a new clarity in his eyes. "Did you know that before the accident, I often wondered why I felt so empty despite all the success?" he began. "I had a stunning fiancé, a business empire, friends who envied me. And yet, something always felt missing." He took a few steps toward her, closing the physical distance between them. "I had to lose everything to be left completely vulnerable, to find something genuine," he continued. "You saw me at my worst, frail, dependent, abandoned by those who claimed to love me, and still you chose to stay." Amelia rose as well, her eyes meeting his. The intermittent flashes of lightning illuminated her face, highlighting the honesty in her gaze. "Any decent person would have done the same," she argued softly. "No," he countered firmly. "A decent person might have reported the neglect, perhaps, but few would have dedicated months of their lives without pay, risking themselves to uncover a conspiracy. What you did transcends professional duty, and what I feel for you transcends gratitude." He took her hands in his gaze intense and sincere. Outside, the storm seemed to reach its climax, but inside the office, a moment of perfect clarity was unfolding between them. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I don't want to face it without you by my side. Not as my nurse or my assistant, but as my partner in every sense of the word." His voice softened. "This is something I want, not because of what happened, but in spite of it. I got to know your character under the worst possible circumstances, and I can't imagine anyone I admire more." The silence that followed seemed to hold the weight of all the decisions that had led them to this moment. The ticking of the old grandfather clock marked seconds that felt like eternities. When Amelia finally spoke, her voice was soft but resolute. "I've always believed that the greatest blessings sometimes come disguised as tragedies," she said. "What happened to you was terrible, but it brought truths to light that needed to be revealed, and it brought us to each other." She squeezed his hands lightly. "Yes," she answered simply. "I want to build that future with you, whatever it may be." The kiss they shared sealed a promise that had begun long before, in the quiet moments of care and devotion, when she tended to him without expecting recognition, and continued in the growing trust they developed during the investigation. It was a beginning neither of them could have foreseen, born from the most unlikely circumstances. As the storm began to subside outside, a new sense of peace settled between them. The betrayals of the past, though painful, had cleared the way for something infinitely more valuable, a love founded not on appearances or social convenience, but on a deep knowledge of each other's character. When Matthew looked into Amelia's eyes, he didn't see the nurse who had cared for him, nor the ally who had helped unmask his betrayers. He saw the woman he was choosing, with a full heart and open mind, to share the rest of his life with. And in that shared gaze was more truth than in all the words of love Valeria had professed to him for years. September arrived in Los Angeles with the crisp, clear air that often follows the end of a summer heatwave. The bougainvillea bloomed vibrantly in the mansion's garden, as if celebrating the positive changes of the past few months. The relationship between Matthew and Amelia was flourishing in a similar way. What had begun as an extraordinary situation of care and survival was gradually transforming into something deeper and more authentic. Between rebuilding the company and the court hearings against Valeria and Ethan, they found moments to truly get to know each other, beyond the crisis that had united them. One particularly pleasant evening, they were having dinner on the mansion's terrace under a starry sky. The city lights spread out below them, like a reflection of the firmament. A private chef had prepared a special farm-to-table meal to mark the upcoming Labor Day weekend, and a Tunapa Valley wine perfectly complemented the dishes. Matthew watched Amelia as she commented on the stars. In these months, he had discovered so many facets of her: her passion for astronomy, her love for the novels of Carl John Steinbeck, her ability to hum classic jazz standards, and yet there were fundamental questions he had yet to ask. "I never asked why you chose nursing," he commented, pouring her more wine. "What led you to that profession?" A melancholic smile touched Amelia's lips as she considered her answer. Her eyes reflected the distant city lights, as if looking into a faraway past. "My father became very ill when I was 15, she began. "Multiple organ failure due to a rare autoimmune disease. Lupus, complicated by kidney and liver failure." She paused, as if gathering strength to continue. "We spent years in and out of county general hospital and specialized clinics. It was a terrible time, with my mum working double shifts to pay for the treatments." Her eyes brightened slightly. "But there was one nurse in particular, Ramon, who completely transformed that experience. The memory seemed to bring her comfort despite the sadness it evoked. He treated my father with dignity, even in the most difficult moments. He talked to him normally, told jokes about how the Clippers could never quite make it, made sure he had privacy when he needed to perform uncomfortable procedures." Her voice softened. "He never reduced him to his illness, and I realized that in the midst of so much suffering, he created small moments of humanity that made all the difference." She took a thoughtful sip of wine. "When my father finally passed away, I decided I wanted to do for others what Ramon did for us. It's not just about medical procedures, it's about preserving people's dignity when they are most vulnerable." Matthew absorbed her words, recognizing in them exactly what Amelia had done for him, the way she had protected not just his body, but his dignity and his future. "And you?" she asked, shifting the focus of the conversation. "Did you always want to be a businessman?" Matthew smiled gently, remembering his youth. The night spent sketching imaginary buildings, the blueprints saved in folders that were probably still in a corner of the mansion. "Actually, I wanted to be an architect," he confessed. "I loved creating spaces, thinking about how people would interact with them. I'd spend hours designing buildings that combined function with beauty." His gaze drifted for a moment to the city skyline, with its modern skyscrapers next to historic buildings. "But my father had other plans. The family business needed a successor, and my facility with numbers and negotiation made me the natural candidate." He gestured with his hand, symbolically encompassing his business empire. "At first, it was a sacrifice. I studied business instead of architecture, learned about contracts instead of designing spaces." He cut a piece of his filet, the complex flavors a perfect match for the story he was telling. "But eventually I found satisfaction in expanding the business, creating jobs, investing in projects that benefited communities. I turned that obligation into something with purpose. Every development we build provides homes, workspaces, places for families to grow." Amelia watched as Matthew spoke with passion about the positive aspects of his work, despite the circumstances that led him to it. His eyes shone as he described the social projects funded by his foundation, the affordable housing he had built in underserved areas. "That's why Ethan was able to manipulate you so easily," she observed shrewdly. "He exploited that search for meaning, presenting himself as someone with similar values." Matthew nodded thoughtfully, surprised by the sharpness of her observation. "I was always looking for purpose in everything I did," he admitted. "Even my relationship with Valeria." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I convinced myself it was love, when in reality it was more about completing an image I thought was important. The successful tycoon, the stunning fiancée, the perfect life that everyone envied but no one really knew. He reached his hand across the table, gently touching Amelia's fingers. Her skin, warm and slightly calloused from years of dedicated work, represented an authenticity that Valeria, with her perfect manicures, had never possessed. The irony is that I needed to lose everything to find something genuinely meaningful. Amelia intertwined her fingers with his, a simple gesture filled with promise. Sometimes we need all the superficial layers stripped away to see what really matters, she said. Like when an old building is demolished and you discover the foundations are still solid. Matthew smiled at the architectural metaphor, so fitting for his youthful dreams. That night, under the starry Los Angeles sky, they shared more than stories of their past. They exchanged visions of a future they would build together. A future based not on appearances or social expectations, but on a bond forged through adversity and cemented in mutual respect. As the night wore on and the stars slowly wheeled above them, they both understood that the tragedies they had lived through, however painful, had allowed them to find something precious and rare, an authentic connection in a world where appearances often hide the truth. The imposing courtroom of the Los Angeles County Superior Court was utterly silent as Judge Wallace prepared to deliver the verdict. After months of hearings and a media-frenzied trial that had captured national attention, the moment of truth had arrived. Ethan and Valeria, seated at the defendant's table, were mere shadows of the elegant, sophisticated people they once were. Dressed in simple clothes with defeated expressions, they awaited their fate. The arrogance that once defined them had been replaced by a grim resignation. The evidence presented by the prosecution had been overwhelming. Audio recordings of them planning the murder, forged documents with expertly imitated signatures, testimony from mechanics at a Van Nuys auto shop who had been paid to tamper with the car's brakes, and detailed records of suspicious bank transfers to offshore accounts. Matthew and Amelia sat side by side in the front row, their hands discreetly intertwined as they listened intently. Samuel Montgomery, sitting beside them, nodded with satisfaction as the judge enumerated the proven crimes. In case number 457-2023, this court finds Ethan Cole guilty of attempted murder, corporate fraud, forgery, and various financial crimes, the judge stated in a solemn voice. He is hereby sentenced to 15 years in prison and ordered to make restitution for all misappropriated assets and funds. He paused for a drink of water before continuing. As for the co-defendant, Valeria Dane, this court finds her guilty as an accomplice on all aforementioned charges, with a sentence of 12 years in prison. The sound of the gavel echoed through the hall, sealing the fate of those who had tried to destroy Matthew. As he heard the final rap, he felt an immense weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't happiness he felt. There was no celebrating the downfall of people he once deeply cared for, but a sense of closure, of justice served. As the bailiffs led the convicts away, Valeria briefly turned her head toward Matthew. For an instant their eyes met. There was no hatred in his, only a resigned sadness for what could have been and never was. Outside the courthouse, a swarm of reporters awaited them on the steps. The story of the tycoon who survived a deadly conspiracy, saved by a dedicated nurse who then became his partner, had captured the public's imagination. Camera flashes popped everywhere as questions were shouted from all directions. How does it feel seeing your ex-fiancé and best friend convicted, Mr. Sterling? Is it true that you two are in a formal relationship? What will happen to Sterling Development Group now? Are you planning to get married soon? Matthew raised a hand for silence. His years in front of boardrooms and press conferences had given him the necessary poise for these situations. He spoke with clarity and firmness. What happened was a personal tragedy that I prefer to leave in the past. I am focused on the future, on rebuilding not just my business, but my personal life on a new foundation. His gaze softened as he turned to Amelia. The only statement I will make is one of gratitude to this extraordinary woman, who showed me that people of character and integrity still exist in this world. Without her, I wouldn't be standing here today. Ignoring the rest of the questions, Montgomery skillfully guided them to a waiting car, slipping away from the media frenzy. Back at the Beverly Hills mansion, as the afternoon sun bathed the expansive gardens in a golden light, Matthew surprised Amelia with an unexpected proposal. "I've been thinking about selling this house," he announced, as they walked among the roses and bougainvillea that Joaquin tended with such care. "There are too many memories here, not all of them good." Amelia nodded in understanding, her hand lightly brushing the petals of a peach-colored rose. "Where would you go?" she asked, pausing to watch a monarch butterfly that had landed nearby. "Where we would go," Matthew gently corrected, taking her hand. "If you'd like, of course. I was thinking of something smaller, more personal. A place we can choose together that will be truly our home, not just a display of status." Amelia's eyes lit up at the idea. A new space, free from the ghosts of past betrayals, a place that would reflect the genuine bond they had developed. "I'm also refocusing the business," Matthew continued, as they sat on a stone bench under a century-old sycamore tree. "This whole experience made me question what really matters. I want to use some of the resources to establish a foundation focused on healthcare for people without adequate access, especially in rural areas like Appalachia." Amelia's face transformed upon hearing this. It was as if Matthew had voiced a dream she herself had harbored, but never mentioned. "You'd be perfect to help run that project," he added. "Your experience, your compassion, your humanistic view of medicine, if you're interested, of course." Amelia looked at him with a mixture of surprise and contained emotion. "A professional collaboration as well?" she asked, a soft smile playing on her lips. "In every aspect of life," Matthew confirmed, gently pulling her into his arms. The scent of the garden flowers enveloped them as the sun began to set over the city. "That's the beauty of what we found. It began with care and duty, transformed into trust and companionship, and blossomed into something I never imagined possible." In that shared embrace, they both felt a chapter of their lives definitively close, while another, more authentic and fulfilling, was just beginning to be written. Justice had been served, but more importantly, they had found something no court verdict could provide, the chance to build a future together based on true values. As the first stars appeared in the LA sky, Matthew and Amelia looked out at the city skyline before them, a city of contrasts and opportunities, where they had suffered deep betrayals, but also where they had discovered a connection that transcended all expectations. The dawn light filtered softly through the large windows of the house in Santa Barbara. A year had passed since the trial that marked the end of a dark chapter and the beginning of a new life. The Pacific Ocean, with its infinite horizon, had become the perfect backdrop for this rebirth. Matthew and Amelia had married 6 months earlier in an intimate ceremony on the beach, accompanied only by true friends and close family. Dr. Evans, Samuel Montgomery, Joaquin and Lupe, the small circle that had supported them through the most difficult times, witnessed a union that transcended the conventional. The home they had chosen together, an elegant yet cozy house with panoramic ocean views, perfectly reflected the balance they had found. The contemporary architecture with touches of local craftsmanship combined the best of both their worlds, Matthew's refined taste and Amelia's authentic warmth. The Calma Sterling Contreras Foundation was thriving beyond their initial expectations. In just 1 year, they had established 3 community clinics in underserved areas of Appalachia, providing quality medical care to communities that had never had proper access to health services. The training program for rural nurses, personally directed by Amelia, had already graduated its first class of professionals. It was a legacy that perfectly combined Matthew's business acumen with Amelia's experience and compassion, a synergy that characterized every aspect of their partnership, both personal and professional. That Sunday morning, as they drank coffee on the terrace watching the ocean, Matthew silently contemplated the path that had led them there. Seagulls flew over the waves, and the aroma of single-origin coffee mixed with the sea breeze. "You know what I was just thinking?" he said finally, breaking the comfortable silence they shared. Amelia looked at him with curiosity, momentarily looking up from the John Steinbeck novel she was reading. "What's that, my love?" "The title the tabloids gave our story was completely wrong." Amelia smiled, remembering the sensational headlines that had dominated the press the previous year. "The one about millionaire wakes from coma and catches nurse doing something that broke his heart?" Matthew nodded, taking her hand across the teakwood table. "Yes, they got it all backward." His gaze drifted for a moment to the endless horizon. "It wasn't just me who woke from a coma. In reality, I'd been living in a kind of coma before the accident, surrounded by people who didn't truly love me, chasing a version of success that didn't fulfill me, accepting appearances as if they were reality. His gaze met hers, full of tenderness and gratitude. The real awakening wasn't physical, it was spiritual. You showed me what it means to be truly cared for, not out of interest or obligation, but out of genuine compassion. Amelia squeezed his hand gently, her eyes shining with emotion. Maybe we woke up together, she suggested. I was also living a limited life, focused only on my work, never allowing myself to dream of something bigger. I was taking care of you in your coma, not knowing that I too was in a way asleep. A small Russian blues cat, which they had adopted months earlier from a local shelter, suddenly jumped into Matthew's lap, purring contentedly. They had named him Anchor, a constant reminder of the journey they had shared. The most ironic thing, Matthew mused as he stroked the cat, is that Valeria and Ethan thought they were taking something from me with their plans. But in the end, without realizing it, they gave me the greatest gift possible. Amelia looked at him with a questioning expression. How so? If it hadn't been for the accident, for the coma, for the betrayal, we never would have met. I would have never discovered what it truly means to love and be loved. A serene smile formed on his face. It's strange how life sometimes leads us to happiness through the most unlikely paths. The waves broke gently against the rocks below their terrace, their constant rhythm a reminder of life's persistence. A monarch butterfly, perhaps on its migratory journey, landed briefly on the railing before continuing its trek. Life has funny ways of teaching us, Amelia said, resting her head on Matthew's shoulder. Sometimes we need to lose everything to find what really matters. Matthew kissed her forehead gently, aware of the precious second chance he had been given. His businesses continued to thrive, but now they had a purpose that transcended the material. His life, once defined by possessions and appearances, was now measured in moments of authentic connection. And sometimes, he completed softly, we need to wake up to a new day to realize the sun was always there, just waiting for us to open our eyes. The cat purred as if in agreement, as the couple watched the waves crash on the beach below. They were perfect symbols of how life storms eventually calm, revealing unexpected beauty on the shore. In the distance, a fishing boat was returning to the harbor, its morning's work complete. Just as those fishermen returned home with their valuable catch, Matthew and Amelia had navigated turbulent waters to find a treasure that many seek but few find. A love based not on convenience or appearances, but on a deep knowledge of each other's true self. What had begun as a story of betrayal and near death had transformed into a rebirth. The real miracle was not just the physical awakening from the coma, but the awakening of two hearts to possibilities neither of them had ever imagined. In a corner of the terrace, on a small Metallavera tile-ceiled table, rested the old grandfather clock that had once marked the endless hours of Matthew's coma. Now restored and working perfectly, it served as a constant reminder that even broken things can find a new purpose when cared for with love and patience, just like them. The first light of dawn bathed the windows of the Count Sterling Contreras Foundation in Los Angeles. 5 years had passed since that decisive moment on the beach in Santa Barbara, where Matthew and Amelia had reflected on the extraordinary path that had united them. 5 years of growth, purpose, and a happiness that neither of them had believed possible before they met. The building that housed the Foundation's headquarters was a harmonious blend of contemporary architecture and classic Californian elements. Large windows allowed natural light to flood every space, while murals by local artists told stories of healing, community, and hope. It was the physical manifestation of Matthew and Amelia's shared vision, a place where business efficiency merged with human warmth. Matthew gazed at the city from his top-floor office. At 48, his face showed lines of experience, but his eyes held a serenity he had never possessed in his years as a ruthless tycoon. The impeccable suit was still part of his image, but it was now accompanied by a genuine smile that had been absent for much of his previous life. The representative from the WHO just confirmed their visit for tomorrow, announced Samuel Montgomery, who had left his private practice to become the Foundation's chief legal officer. They're very interested in our community care model to replicate in other countries. Matthew nodded, satisfied. What had begun as 3 small rural clinics had grown into a network of 20 health centers distributed across the most underserved regions of the country. The training program for indigenous nurses, the Foundation's flagship initiative, had graduated over 200 professionals who now brought quality health care to communities that had historically been neglected. Amelia will be thrilled, he replied, glancing at the family portrait on his desk. In it, Amelia was holding Kihopibaf, the 3-year-old daughter they had adopted 2 years prior. The little girl, rescued from an orphanage in Appalachia during the inauguration of one of their clinics, had completed their family in a way neither had anticipated. Did the results from the pilot project in Kentucky come in? They exceeded all expectations, Samuel confirmed, handing him a folder. Infant mortality is down 63% in the communities served, and complicated births have been cut nearly in half. The state government wants to expand the model across the entire region. Matthew was leafing through the reports when the door opened softly. Amelia entered as radiant as ever at 42, accompanied by Hope, whose dark curls bounced with every enthusiastic step. The little girl ran to him with open arms, while Amelia exchanged greetings with Samuel. "Daddy, look what I made," the little girl exclaimed, handing him a colorful drawing where figures representing her family were surrounded by what appeared to be many smaller people. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Matthew replied, lifting her into his arms. "Who are all these people?" "They're the kids who are going to be better because you helped them," she explained, with the simple wisdom only children possess. "My teacher asked us to draw what our parents do, and I said you help kids not get sick." Amelia and Matthew exchanged emotional glances. For their daughter to understand, in her own childlike way, the essence of their work was a deeper validation than any official recognition. After Samuel left, and Hope was accompanied by her nanny to the small playroom attached to the office, Amelia approached Matthew with an envelope in her hand. "This arrived this morning," she said, her voice slightly tense. "It's from Valeria." Matthew took the envelope with a neutral expression. After serving 8 years of her sentence, Valeria had been released on parole for good behavior 6 months ago. Ethan, whose sentence was longer and who had unsuccessfully tried to get it reduced, was still in prison. Carefully, Matthew opened the envelope and pulled out a handwritten letter. Valeria's elegant script, now slightly less firm, filled 2 pages. "She wants to meet," he summarized after reading it carefully. "She says she's gone through a process of deep reflection during her time in prison and wants to apologize in person." Amelia sat on the edge of the desk, her attentive eyes studying her husband's reactions. "How do you feel about that?" she asked softly. Over the first few years, they had talked a lot about forgiveness, about freeing oneself from the weight of resentment without necessarily rebuilding broken relationships. Matthew carefully folded the letter and returned it to the envelope before answering. "I think I'm ready to hear her out," he said finally. "Not for her, but for me. For us." He took Amelia's hand in his. "We've built something so beautiful, so genuine, that there's no room for resentment anymore. Anger consumes too much energy that I'd rather devote to things that truly matter." Amelia smiled, recognizing in his words the evolution of the wounded man who had awakened from a coma years ago. The old Matthew would have sought revenge. This Matthew sought peace. "Would you like me to go with you?" she offered. "Always," he replied without hesitation. "But in this case, I think I need to do this alone. Some circles need to be closed the same way they began." A week later, on a typically rainy afternoon, Matthew waited in a small coffee shop in the OLA Arts District. The place, discreet and quiet, was mostly frequented by artists and writers, far from the business circles where he might have been easily recognized. When Valeria walked in, Matthew barely recognized her. Prison had erased every trace of the dazzling woman who had once captivated high society. Her hair, now showing visible gray streaks, was pulled back in a simple bun. She wore simple but dignified clothes, and her face, free of makeup, showed lines that spoke of difficult years. She approached the table with hesitant steps, as if afraid of being rejected at any moment. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly, as she took a seat across from him. Matthew nodded, observing her without hostility, but also without the warmth he had once shown her. It was like looking at a stranger who happened to resemble someone he had known in another life. "Your letter said you wanted to talk," he replied simply, giving her space to begin. Valeria took a sip of the water already on the table, as if searching for courage. "I've rehearsed this moment hundreds of times over the years," she confessed, "and now that I'm here all the prepared words seem inadequate." She paused, her hands trembling slightly. "The first thing I need to say is that I am deeply sorry. I don't expect your forgiveness. I don't even deserve it. But I needed you to know that I understand the magnitude of my betrayal." Matthew listened in silence, allowing her to speak without interruption. Prison gives you a lot of time to think, she continued, to dismantle the lies you've told yourself for years. I convinced myself that I was using you in the same way you used all of us, as accessories for your perfect life. But the truth, which I can now see with painful clarity, is that you were always sincere. It was Ethan and I who were living the lie. The rain tapped gently against the cafe windows, creating a melancholic backdrop for this long-overdue conversation. I've followed your work with the foundation, she added after a pause. What you've built with Amelia is extraordinary. It's the kind of legacy that will last for generations. Matthew felt a wave of serene pride thinking of the work they had done, the lives they had changed. I never would have gotten there without what happened, he replied finally. I don't justify what you did, but I recognize that the experience led me to find a more authentic purpose and to find someone who loves me for who I am, not for what I represent. Valeria nodded, her eyes moist, but not allowing herself to cry. That's another reason I wanted to see you, she said, her voice firmer. I needed to thank you. Matthew looked at her with genuine surprise. Thank me? For not seeking revenge when you had all the power to do so. You could have made our sentences much harsher. You could have destroyed any chance we had at a future. But you limited yourself to seeking justice, not retribution. It was true. Despite the advice of some legal advisors, Matthew had insisted they not press additional charges that could have resulted in significantly longer sentences. Revenge would have only prolonged the connection between us, Matthew explained, and I needed to sever that tie to fully heal. For the next hour, they had an honest but calm conversation. Valeria told him about her plans to work with an organization that helps formerly incarcerated women reintegrate into society. Matthew shared a few anecdotes about Hope and the Foundation's future projects. They were not friends, they never would be again, but they had reached a peace that had seemed impossible years before. When they finally said goodbye, as the rain began to let up, Matthew felt the last chapter of his old life was definitively closed. That evening in their Pasadena's home, a beautiful space filled with books, art and warmth that perfectly reflected its inhabitants, Matthew told Amelia the details of the meeting as they watched Hope play with Anchor, the cat who was now showing signs of old age, but was still a beloved member of the family. And how do you feel now? Amelia asked, snuggled beside him on the sofa, the warm lamplight creating an intimate atmosphere. At peace, he answered simply. As if I've set down a burden I didn't realize I was still carrying. Amelia nodded, understanding. That's what forgiveness is. It doesn't erase the past, but it frees you from its power over your present. Matthew looked at his family, Amelia, Hope, even old Anchor, and felt a wave of gratitude that threatened to overwhelm him. You know, when I was in the coma, he reflected, the doctors said I could possibly hear what was happening around me, even if I couldn't respond. I sometimes wonder if my subconscious already knew, from those first one-sided conversations with you, that you had arrived to change my life completely. Amelia smiled, remembering those days when she would talk for hours to an unconscious man, sharing her thoughts, readings, and hopes. Perhaps the soul recognizes its partner, even when the mind is asleep, she suggested, with the same mix of pragmatism and romance that defined her personality. Hope came over to them with a book in her hands, silently asking for their nightly reading ritual. As Matthew began to narrate the adventures of the children's story, with Hope nestled between them and Anchor purring softly at their feet, he understood that the real miracle hadn't been surviving the accident or even waking from the coma. The real miracle had been discovering that sometimes you have to lose everything to find what truly matters. That sometimes the worst betrayals can lead to the most precious gifts, and that, on occasion, the most significant awakening is not of the body, but of the soul finally recognizing its true purpose and its authentic home. Outside, the rain had stopped completely, leaving a clear sky where the stars shone with unusual brilliance over the city of Los Angeles. It was a perfect reminder that, even after the darkest of storms, there is always the promise of a new beginning, lit by a light that had always been there, patiently waiting to be discovered.